The chill that clung to the river Boyne in the hour before dawn on July 1st, 1690, was more than the damp of an Irish summer night. It was the cold air of a continent holding its breath. In the murky grey light, the figure of King William III, Prince of Orange and now King of England, could be seen moving among his Dutch guards. He favored his right side. The deep bruise from a Jacobite cannon shot a persistent, throbbing reminder of the previous day's mortality. Across the water in the Jacobite camp, King James II of England stared into the fading darkness, a monarch in exile clinging to a last, desperate hope. Between them, the sluggish river was more than a barrier. It was a geopolitical fault line. The forces assembled on its banks represented not just two claimants to a throne, but two visions for Europe's future, one of absolute Catholic monarchy led from Versailles, and one of a balanced, often fractious, coalition of Protestant and Catholic powers determined to check its rise. The decisions made here in the next 12 hours would send shockwaves from Dublin to Vienna, determining the destiny of nations for a century to come. To grasp the full magnitude of this moment, one must journey back to the epicenter of European power, the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. There, King Louis XIV, the Sun King, moved through a court of unparalleled splendor, the very embodiment of the divine right of kings. His ambition was absolute, his vision clear, a Europe shaped by French might and Catholic orthodoxy. His principal obstacle was not a nation, but a man, William of Orange. Slight plagued by asthma, but possessing a will of tempered steel, William's life's work was the containment of France. He had built the League of Augsburg, a fragile alliance of German princes, Spain and Sweden, but it lacked a crucial counterweight, the naval and financial power of England. For years, England under Charles II had played a neutral, mercenary game. The accession of James II in 1685, however, promised a seismic shift. A devout Catholic on the English throne, indebted to Louis, could transform England from a balancer into France's most powerful ally. The combined Franco-English fleets would command the Channel and the Atlantic. The balance of power, a concept debated by philosophers and feared by diplomats, would be shattered forever. Thus, England's glorious revolution in 1688 was, from its inception, a European crisis. When William sailed on the Protestant wind, his fleet was bankrolled by Dutch merchants and watched with hopeful anxiety from Vienna and Madrid. Pope Innocent XI, ironically, offered tacit support, seeing the expansionist Louis as a greater threat to papal authority than the Protestant William. James's flight to France was not an epilogue. It was the opening of a new, more dangerous chapter. Louis XIV welcomed him at Versailles not as a pitiful cousin, but as a strategic asset, a casus belli and a banner to rally Catholic sentiment. Ireland was chosen as the battlefield with cold precision. It was a Catholic kingdom in waiting, a dagger pointed at England's soft underbelly, and the perfect quagmire to drain William's resources, keeping him distracted from the main theaters of war in Flanders and the Rhineland. The Jacobite army that formed was a creature of French design, funded by French gold, supplied by French arms, and stiffened by 6,000 of Louis's finest infantry. The Battle of the Boyne, therefore, was the first major pitched battle where a French-sponsored army directly confronted the champion of the Grand Alliance, who also happened to be the King of England. William's decision to take personal command in the spring of 1690 was a signal of supreme strategic priority. When he landed at Carrickfergus, he did so as a triple sovereign, King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and as the de facto commander-in-chief of the anti-French coalition. His army was a physical manifestation of this alliance. The corps was his veteran Dutch Blue Guards, among the finest infantry in Europe. Alongside them marched Danish mercenaries, their pay guaranteed by English parliamentary funds, French Huguenot refugees who had fled Louis's dragonnades, fighting with a bitter personal hatred, and English and Scots regiments, some loyal, others still uncertain. This was an army of ideology as much as loyalty. The £200,000 in silver in William's war chest was a direct transfusion from the Bank of England's nascent power, a down payment on European security fought for on Irish soil. Facing them, James's army at the Boyne was a coalition of necessity, riven with internal contradiction. At its professional heart were the French brigades, commanded by the Comte de Lauzun. They were professional, disdainful of the savages they fought alongside, and ultimately loyal to Louis, not James. The bulk of the force was comprised of Irish Catholic levies, raised by the Earl of Tyrconnell. For these men, the war was not about European balance but about land, faith, and revering a century of plantation and persecution. They fought for the promises James had made, religious liberty and the restoration of confiscated estates. This fundamental disconnect between French geopolitical games and Irish existential struggle created a fatal schism in the Jacobite command. The French advisors urged caution, a war of maneuver. The Irish lords and James himself, feeling the pressure of native support, often yearned for a decisive stand. This tension would reach its breaking point on the field. The extraordinary personal drama of June 30th had set a stage of high peril. William's decision to picnic within range of Jacobite guns was not folly, but a calculated performance of kingship. It projected an aura of invincible calm, a message to his own troops, and a psychological provocation to the enemy. The cannon shot that struck him was a stark interruption of that narrative, a violent reminder of chaos and chance. The instantaneous spread of the news that William was dead demonstrates how plugged into the European information circuit this battle was. In Paris, bonfires were lit. In the Jacobite camp, euphoria turned to relief. In London, ministers convened emergency councils. For a few hours, the fate of the alliance hinged on the severity of a shoulder wound. William's response, having it dressed and then mounting his horse to ride, pale but determined, through every regiment, was a masterclass in leadership and propaganda. It was a message telegraphed to every capital: the king lives, the cause endures. As a bruised dawn broke on July 1st, William's plan, a product of that same strategic mind that had outmaneuvered Louis on the continent, unfolded. The key was the 10,000-strong detachment sent marching upstream towards Slane and Rossnary. This was not a secret maneuver, but a conspicuous threat designed to be seen and feared. From his commanding viewpoint on the hill of Donor, James and his council watched the dust cloud of the moving columns. The debate that followed was fractured. Lauzun and the French professionals argued it was a feint, designed to draw forces away from the main fords at Oldbridge. They advised holding firm. But James, a man haunted by the memory of flight from London and Salisbury, saw his worst fear materializing, a flanking force cutting the road to his escape route in Dublin. Panic, dressed as decisiveness, won. He ordered the majority of his army, including the elite French infantry and most of his cavalry, to march west to counter this perceived threat. It was a catastrophic misallocation of force. He left the vital crossing point at Oldbridge defended by a thin, overstretched line of around 8,000 men, predominantly raw Irish infantry, under the command of Tyrconnell and the Duke of Burrock. They would face the onslaught of over 24,000 Williamites. The assault at Oldbridge that followed was a spectacle of disciplined horror. For a full hour, William's superior artillery, more numerous and of heavier caliber, pounded the south bank. This was not random fire but systematic softening, designed to break the nerve of inexperienced troops before a single foot soldier entered the water. Then came the moment that would define the battle's iconography. The Dutch Blue Guards advanced to the river's edge in perfect, tight formation. At the command, they entered the water, not as individuals but as a single, moving wall. The river, waist-deep, then chest-deep, swirled around them. Their locked arms and bodies literally acted as a dam, raising the water level further. They held their muskets and powder aloft, utterly vulnerable, unable to return fire as they waded into a storm of Jacobite musket balls. Contemporary accounts describe the Bunna churning pink, men disappearing silently beneath the current, pulled down by the weight of their equipment. The first ranks were cut to pieces as they scrambled onto the far bank, but they did not break. With inhuman discipline, they reformed their lines on the Jacobite side of the river and began delivering crashing volleys. They were the anvil, and they had been hammered into place at a terrible cost. The Jacobite defense was brave but lacked the cohesion to crush this fragile bridgehead. Some regiments, like those of the Earl of Antrim, fired from too great a distance, their enthusiasm outpacing their training. Others, witnessing the carnage they had inflicted, felt a surge of confidence that would soon be their undoing. The crucial Jacobite cavalry charge was an act of desperate brilliance. Led by James's own son, the Duke of Berwick, and the fiery Richard Hamilton, it was a thunderous attempt to sweep the vulnerable guards back into the river before they could be reinforced. 1,000 horsemen descended the slope. From his vantage point across the Bunna, William watched, whispering, "My poor guards, my poor guards." But the guards, now supported by vengeful Huguenot infantry, stood firm. The battle disintegrated into a desperate, swirling melee of slashing swords, pistol shots, and thrusting bayonets at the water's edge. It was into this chaos that the aged Duke of Scumog rode, hearing his Huguenot countrymen were in peril. At 75, he was a symbol of the old European wars of religion. He was cut down by a saber slash and a pistol shot, his death immortalizing him as a martyr for the Williamite cause and galvanizing the troops to fight harder. While the center was locked in its bloody embrace, William executed the decisive killing maneuver. Leading 3,000 cavalry, he forced a crossing at the deep ford of Drubbridge downstream. The water here was treacherous, the current strong. Horses lost their footing, riders were swept away. In excruciating pain from his wounded shoulder, the physical strain of the crossing overwhelmed William. Upon reaching the south bank, he collapsed to the ground, unable to stand, gasping for air. For several long minutes, the fate of the battle and perhaps the campaign rested on the king's ability to simply draw breath. He remounted. His emergence on the Jacobite right flank with a powerful force of fresh cavalry was the final, unbearable pressure. The Jacobite line, already strained to breaking at Oldbridge, now faced attack from the rear. The order for a general retreat became inevitable. The profound tragedy for the Jacobite cause was that most of its army never struck a blow. James, with his detached wing containing his best troops, spent the pivotal hours of the battle in a state of impotent observation. He faced the forces of the Count of Scumog, who had deliberately halted before a large area of marshy ground, their mission to fix James in place, already accomplished. When the thunder of battle from Oldbridge reached a crescendo and then faltered, and when frantic messengers brought news of the retreat, James's spirit, so often brittle, shattered completely. He turned his own force and led the retreat to Dublin, not as a general covering his army's withdrawal, but as a fugitive once more. His personal failure transformed a serious tactical defeat into a catastrophic rout of morale and legitimacy. The immediate aftermath was a study in contrasting historical trajectories. For William, victory at the Bunna was essential but not conclusive. The Jacobite army, though beaten, retired in reasonable order towards Limerick. The war in Ireland would drag on for another grueling year, culminating in the far bloodier and more decisive Battle of Urim in 1691. William's gaze, however, was already turning eastward, across the Irish Sea and the English Channel. His presence was urgently needed on the continent. He had secured his base. The Bunna ensured that England, with its wealth and its navy, would remain a committed, active member of the Grand Alliance, not a French puppet state. He left his generals to manage the Irish campaign and returned to London, and then to the battlefields of Flanders to confront Louis XIV directly. For Europe, the result was unequivocal. The Bunna slammed shut the door on a French-controlled England. The financial revolution in London, soon to be crystallized in the founding of the Bank of England in 1694, would now fund coalition warfare against France for generations. The Royal Navy was freed to contest Louis's ambitions globally, in the Mediterranean and the New World. The balance of power, which had tilted so perilously towards Versailles, was forcibly righted. The 9 Years' War would continue until 1697, ending with the Treaty of Ryswick, which forced Louis to recognize William as King of England and return some conquered territories. It was a stalemate, but a stalemate that preserved a multipolar Europe. The Boyne was the pivotal battle that made that stalemate, rather than French hegemony, possible. In Ireland, the battle was stripped of its European context and absorbed into a much darker, more localized narrative. For the Protestant ascendancy, it was the miraculous deliverance, the foundation of their civil and religious liberties for centuries to come. For the defeated Catholic majority, it was the final, crushing blow to the old Gaelic order, sealing their dispossession and political exclusion under the harsh penal laws. The memory of the Boyne was fossilized into myth, a symbol of division rather than a chapter in a continental struggle. William of Orange was reduced from a complex statesman to a sectarian icon on one side and a foreign tyrant on the other. Yet when the partisan fog is cleared, the true, colossal scale of July 1st, 1690 becomes visible. It was a day where individual human elements, the asthma of a king, the nerve of another, the discipline of a guard, the failure of a command, interacted with the immense, impersonal forces of geopolitics, religion, and economics. The River Boyne, a modest watercourse, became the channel through which the future of a continent was decided. The victory there ensured that Europe's destiny would be written by the tense equilibrium of competing powers, not by the absolute decree of a single sun king. It was the moment, bloody and decisive, when the balance of power tilted back from the brink, setting the stage for the century of global conflict and Enlightenment thought that would follow. The echoes of those hours by the river did not fade in Ireland. They reverberated in the council chambers of Europe for 100 years. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment to encourage me for making such content. See you in the next video.